Okay, so he says, Fortinbras has, and I really like this metaphor here, but Fortinbras has sharked up a list of lawless resolutes for food and diet to some enterprise that have a stomach in it, right? He's like a shark that's gotten all these little fish under his control. Um, and why did he get the army together? And Horatio says right here, I'm on page bottom of page 2. Horatio says, which is no other. Here's what he's doing, as doth it well appear unto our state, as far as we can tell. But recovery of us by strong hand and terms compulsatory, those foresaid lands, so by his father lost. And this, I take it, is the main motive of our preparation, this the source of our watch, the chief head of this post-haste and rummage in the land. And that's it. It goes by pretty quickly, but as an audience member, you're likely to kind of forget it. Because it's just a lot of information really early in the play about a bunch of people that are, number one, dead, and number two, really annoyingly, have the same names as two other characters in the play. Like they say Fortinbras and they say Hamlet, but to make things extra confusing, of course, they have the same names as the characters we know, Fortinbras Jr., Hamlet Jr., and so it's very confusing for an audience. Making things doubly complicated, by the way, that I should tell you guys about as we move forward, is sometimes they will be like, hey, Denmark, do this for me. Hey, Norway, do this for me. Hey, England, do this for me. It was tradition back then you could call the king King whatever, King Hamlet, King Fortinbras, but you could also just call him Denmark because he's the king of Denmark. The king of Norway, you could call, hey, King Fortinbras, but you could also call him, I honor you, Norway, because it's like their country. So this is going to come up again and again. Something's going to be extra confusing in this is sometimes they'll be like, and I asked Denmark, but what he means is I asked the king of Denmark. And it's or England, or so sometimes just be aware if you see the word Denmark or England or Norway, it may refer to the king, not to the country. Um, Okay. So the next time we hear about Fortinbras is Claudius. Now, I Claudius's first speech in the play is on page 3. It's Act 1, Scene 2. It's the very first words of Act 1, Scene 2. I actually really like this speech. I think it's quite beautiful. I have trouble teaching beauty. I don't know how to be like, look how good this is. But it's kind of a neat speech. Um, and what he's doing in the speech is he's basically saying, listen, um, it's really sad that my brother died, and I have to take his place as king. But also, there's some good news, which is I'm in love with the king's former wife, and we're married now, so that's nice. And so he gives this speech. It's basically like a press. I've seen one movie version of it, showed it as like a press conference, which I really liked, where he's giving announcements to the country because everything's been crazy lately. The king died. And now this Fortinbras guy is attacking, and so the new king, Claudius, King Hamlet's brother, who's, we later on it would turn out he killed him and took the crown, but right now we don't know that. He gives a really nice speech. Whatever you want to say about Claudius, he's very good with words, and I actually I think this speech is absolutely beautiful. But let's take a look at it. So Claudius says he's like a politician. He really knows how to talk well. He gives a good argument here. Though yet of Hamlet, again, that's Hamlet Senior, that's the dead guy. Though yet of Hamlet, our dear brother's death, the memory be green, meaning new, and that it befitted to bear our hearts in grief, and our whole kingdom to be contracted in one brow of woe. Yet so far hath discretion fought with nature, that we with wisest sorrow think on him, together with remembrance of ourselves. Like it's, we gotta think about him, but we gotta think about us too. Therefore, our sometime sister, I mean sister-in-law, therefore, our sometime sister, now our queen, the imperial jointress to this warlike state, have we, as 'twere, with a defeated joy, with an auspicious and dropping eye, with mirth and funeral, with dirge and marriage, in equal scale weighing delight and dole, taken to wife. You see what he's doing here? Is he's balanced. He's saying like we're sad about the funeral, but we're happy about the wedding. And so he uses these paradoxical phrases like defeated joy, those are opposites, an auspicious eye and a dropping eye. Those are opposites. Auspicious means good things are going to happen. Dropping is bad. With mirth and funeral, that's opposites. With dirge and marriage, those are sadness and marriage and happiness and the funeral. But it's because it's a complicated time when there's been both a funeral and a marriage, and so it's good and bad. Is kind of he's arguing basically that everything is balanced. He's trying to make everybody feel better. But the key reason for the press conference is everybody's talking about Fortinbras, and he has to do something about that. So he says, nor have we therein barred your better wisdoms, which have freely gone with this affair along, like, thanks for all your advice. Now follows that young Fortinbras. So now we're talking about the kid. holding a weak supposal of our worth, or thinking by our late dear brother's death our state to be disjoint and out of frame, colleagued with this dream of his advantage, hath not failed to pester us with message importing the surrender of those lands lost by his father, with all bonds of law, to our most valiant brother. So much for him. So basically, Fortinbras says, oh, the king, your king killed my dad and took a bunch of land, and now that your king is dead, you have to give it back to me. And of course, Denmark doesn't want to do this. So the King Claudius is trying to deal with this problem. This is like a very awkward sort of political problem. What's really interesting about Claudius to note, actually, I'll get to that in a second. So he's trying to make everybody feel better about this, and he says right here. So much for him. Now, one of the things that he wants his father's land back. So much for him. We only have Shakespeare's words, and we don't know exactly what happens there. One version that I saw I really liked, where the King Claudius at the press conference is holding up a newspaper that's saying, "Oh, Fortinbras is invading," and he says, he wants the land so by his father lost. And then the king takes the newspaper and he tears it in half and says, "So much for him." I think in the movie version we saw, our guy throws a glass against the wall and shatters it and says, "So much for him," meaning like that's what's going to happen to Fortinbras. I'm going to rip him in half. I'm going to break him. We were not worried about him. He's worthless, like a newspaper or a drinking glass that we can replace very easily. Okay. Now, all right. So how does he deal with the problem? Now, this is interesting to me. Now for ourselves and for this time of meeting, thus much the business is. We have here writ to Norway, that's the king of Norway, uncle of young Fortinbras, who impotent, that's weak, and bedrid, scarcely hears of his nephew's purpose to suppress his further gait herein, in that the levies, lists, and full proportions are all made out of his subject. And we here dispatch you, good Cornelius, and you, Voltimand, for bearers of this greeting to old Norway, that's the king of Norway, giving to you no further personal power to business with the king than the scope of these dilated articles allow. And then they leave. And that's it, and they move on. This is easily forgotten about. Cornelius and Voltimand, I'm sure you don't remember. No one remembers them. They're completely boring. What's interesting, a couple of things are really interesting about the way Claudius handles this. I think one of the most interesting things about this is notice the difference between the brothers, King Hamlet and King Claudius. This is old King Hamlet and King Claudius, the brothers. When King Hamlet had a problem, he deals with it with an axe. He's a warrior. Remember, he shows up in full armor. And if he has a problem, he's going to go out in the battlefield with an axe and, like, chop your head off. Claudius, though, doesn't do that. When Claudius feels like war is coming, he says, you know what I'm going to do? Ambassadors. Claudius' solution to things is not face-to-face violence. Claudius' solution to things is words. He sends ambassadors, because the king of Norway died. King Fortinbras in the old days was killed by King Hamlet. So now young Fortinbras is coming to get his lands back. But interestingly, young Fortinbras is not the king of Norway. His uncle is king of Norway. And so what Claudius says, he says, you know what, I'm going to write this kid's uncle, see if the uncle can stop it. Because the uncle's kind of weak and stuck in bed, so maybe he doesn't even know about it. He doesn't know about it. And so maybe the king of Norway can stop his nephew from invading us. Remember, he's not using the official army, which means he's sneaking around. He's got a sharked up a list of lawless resolutes to some enterprise that have a stomach in it. So that's interesting. That's that part of the play. Everybody forgets about that. And then the play continues. Later on, those two guys will come back to tell you how that went, and I'll go over that next. What I want to point out now is a really interesting detail, the kind of thing that you will miss if you read a summary of the play, the kind of thing that you will miss if you're going too fast. You got to pay attention to the words on the page. Fortinbras' dad died, killed by King Hamlet, but Fortinbras didn't become king of Norway. The son didn't become king. The uncle became king, right? He says, I've here writ to Norway, uncle of young Fortinbras. Okay, fine. I mean, it's a little strange. I normally think that when the father dies, the son becomes king, not the uncle, but okay. I'm sorry. Normally when it's weird because the king died, and then the king's brother became king, not the son. Same thing with Hamlet, though. Hamlet also, his dad died and his brother took over. So it's interesting that these two neighboring countries who are fighting with each other are in the same situation. In both cases, King Hamlet died, Claudius killed him. The King of Norway died, King Hamlet killed him. In both cases, you would expect the son, Hamlet Jr., Fortinbras Jr., to take over, and in both cases, they did not take over. Instead, in both cases, the brother of the previous king took over. So Shakespeare does a thing here, if you're looking at the details, where Fortinbras and Hamlet are mirror images of each other. They're facing the exact same situation. They should be king, and they're not. Their uncles are king, and their dads are dead. Pick it up in the next video.